Good afternoon. Welcome to today's edition of the Coal Scene. I'm Chris Hamilton with the West Virginia Coal Association, and I'll be your host here for the next 28 minutes or so. Really appreciate you taking time to tune us in here today. We're going to be talking about the industry, sort of an update of where things currently stand, little reflection over the past few months. Then we'll be taking a look forward at America's energy future. Joining me in the studio here today is Mr. Jason Bostic, also with the West Virginia Coal Association. Jason does just an outstanding job keeping track of all the statistical information, keeps us almost on an hourly basis informed of a lot of the production, employment, consumption trends taking place around the industry. So Jason, hey, thanks so much for dropping by. Appreciate all the work you do. Appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule to join us here today in the studio.
Glad to be here.
I know we just, and we may hit on this a little bit last month, but just to refresh, just a little bit of a refresher, the industry is showing some signs of recovery. We're mining a little more coal today than we were last year, and certainly since the low mark of 2016. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's interesting, you travel through southern West Virginia in particular, and you hear people say that they see miners at the 7-Eleven gassing up and buying stuff, and on both ends of the day, in the morning and in the evening after work. And people are saying they're hearing coal trains moving, they're seeing trucks, some increased river traffic, transporting coal up and down the Kanawha and other rivers. So I guess we are showing some signs of recovery or improvement this year.
We are. And last year, 2018, was actually, it was an absolute wonderful year for West Virginia's coal industry. We came back from that low of about 85 million tons in 2016. 2017, we touched the 90 to 93 million ton mark. And last year in 2018, we almost broke 100 million tons. And a lot of that growth in production came from southern West Virginia, which was, of course, especially hard hit by the regulatory issues we had during the Obama administration and some of the closure of the power plants. And, of course, southern West Virginia being home to most of the metallurgical coal that we produce. As the steel industry here in this country and around the globe was depressed, those folks suffered as well. But we've seen a lot of that production come back. We're obviously not going to get all of it back, but going from 85 million tons back to almost 100 million tons is very, very encouraging.
You know, we usually make a point over the significance of the coal industry, even in its reduced state or profile like we have today. So many people, even though they're seeing signs of recovery, still believe or submit to the theory that coal's on the decline and coal mining's not that important to the state of West Virginia anymore. And you and I both know that that's so far from the truth. Even though we've ratcheted down production and coal jobs from the high of 10 years ago or so, it's still such a significant business and industry here within the Mountain State.
It is, Chris, and it accounts for so many jobs. And mining, of course, is such a capital-intensive industry that for every one coal mining job, depending on where the mine's located, whether it's in a diversified area or if it's in an isolated area, maybe in one of the southern counties, that coal job accounts for another 11 throughout the economy. And that accounts for everybody from the railroader that helps move the coal to its ultimate end user, or from the person that works at the local gas station that's taking care of these guys in the morning when they're on their way to work. And I think the other issue that we suffer from here in this country is the constant drum from the press and from the media that coal has been replaced or been supplanted as a domestic fuel source for electricity. And while our share of that production, or our share of that electrical generation, has gone down, we're still 30 to 35% of where the nation's electricity comes from coal. But I think the attraction of alternative energy, windmills, solar panels, that just kind of looks better, looks a little more shinier maybe than the coal industry. So we suffer from that a little bit. But again, when it comes to coal as an energy source, we're going to have a portion of it here in this country to make our electricity. And we're certainly going to have it to make steel here in the United States. And the steel industry has itself gone through somewhat of a rebound over the last 2 years. You know, for the first time in this country, the first time in my lifetime, actually, we are restarting blast furnaces instead of shutting them down. So that's a great sign of an economic rebound. And globally, as the rest of the world needs good sources of electricity, reliable electricity, even countries like, say, India and Vietnam that have indigenous coal resources, they're just not as good as ours. They turn primarily to West Virginia for good, high-quality, high BTU coal to help their economy and their electrical base grow. So the signs domestically are encouraging. As the economic activity in the United States picks up, the demand for electricity picks up. So coal will be able to step in and fill that void. But as the developing economies around the world need that source of electricity, they'll most likely, if they can't find it at home, then it'll most likely come from West Virginia.
You know, we talk about the losses. You mentioned today we're 35% coal-fired with respect to electric generation nationwide. And that is so substantial. Even though at one time coal was over 50%,
Yes.
35% is substantial. Nuclear, what is just a little under 20?
Yes.
And that's substantial. You know, 2 points I want to make, and you can comment on either one, but I maintain that, you know, most people outside of the energy industry, they really don't understand that there's only a couple of base fuels that are available to generate electricity. It's not like there's an assortment of 50 or 60 base fuels. I mean, it's coal, gas, nuclear, and then you have your renewables, you know, which is really wind, solar, and geothermal, and a few other, you know, there's still some oil out there being used. But you just have today a very few options available to generate electricity. And the second point is, and you said something that provoked this, the second point is I'm not sure people really understand how much energy we consume in our daily lives as a culture and as a country. So when it comes to fuel switching or just changing coal to wind, the enormity of how much energy we use is just mind-boggling.
It really is, Chris, when you consider it. And yeah, we in this country have enjoyed that a standard of living afforded to us by cheap electricity and by extension cheap energy. And part of that is because of that diversified fuel mix. It's because we in America didn't have to rely just on nuclear or just on natural gas or just on coal. If you look around the globe, take Japan, for instance. Japan generated the majority of its electricity prior to the Fukushima nuclear accident from nuclear power. They had very few other generation sources, so their electricity rates were extremely high. But when you come to, as you move from that extreme to where the United States is, where we're split in about thirds, nuclear, natural gas, and coal, our electricity rates are lower. And because of that, we have heavy industry, we have manufacturing, and you and I don't think twice about using our computers or turning the television on versus folks in other countries that have to really ration their electricity use, either because it's unavailable to them or it's just too expensive. And coal plays an enormous part in keeping the electricity costs down because, along with nuclear, coal is a solid fuel. It's when a power plant operator looks out the back door of the power plant wondering how long he can keep the plant online, he can see that he's got a coal pile there. And I know that I can run at least until that coal pile's gone. He doesn't have to worry about just-in-time delivery of natural gas. Doesn't have to worry about whether or not the cloud's going to go over top of the solar panel. The coal plant's there and it can run. And the coal plants have an extremely high capacity availability factor. That is, if a plant's capacity is, say, 2,900 megawatts, then 85 to 90% of the time that coal plant can provide that 2,900 megawatts. Other energy sources don't have that. And when you move beyond coal and natural gas and nuclear to alternative energy, wind and renewables, their capacity factor is as low as 35 to 20%. And that's because of the variable nature of the renewable resource. You know, the wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine all the time.
And there's storage issues.
There are.
There's transmission issues. There's regeneration issues there, and I think that's where a lot of their research is currently focused. And you know, perhaps someday, you know, those will be in a more prepared state to deliver, you know, energy on a reliable. But in the meantime, we're not there, and you have to rely on your base load and your fossil fuel production. And boy, that reminds me, we heard news just last week that has caused a lot of concern within the industry about the former mayor of New York City pledging money to the Sierra Club on the order of magnitude of $500 million to try to replace or put the remaining coal-fired units in the country out of business. You know, when I first read that, it was like, here we go again. You know, we're just showing some signs of recovery, and maybe that's what it's all about. People once again start building some confidence and reliability into baseload generation. And here you have an individual wanting to use his personal wealth to try to influence public policy makers around the country, and perhaps Washington and others, to do away with all fossil fuel energy forms. You know, it's just hard to put that into perspective or make sense of it.
It is, Chris, and as anybody in the country that's an energy consumer, which is virtually everyone, I think everybody should be concerned about that kind of proposal, because whether the initiative by this fella is directed at coal first and then other fossil fuels like natural gas and oil, let's just assume it's coal to start with. If you set out to remove 30% of the nation's energy mix from coal-fired generation, where's it going to come from? Well, you could probably supplement some of that with natural gas, but we're not constructing any new nuclear plants in this country. So I think most, especially our detractors, would assume that you can provide that energy through windmills and solar panels, and you just can't.
Oh, I think that was exactly what Mr. Bloomberg indicated.
Yeah, but it's a technological impossibility to replace the energy provided by a baseload coal-fired unit, or a natural gas unit for that matter, with variable sources like wind, solar, or even hydroelectricity. So if the source is not available, then the only way you can accomplish his goal is to limit the supply of electricity. That's the only way you can accomplish that. So every man, woman, and child in America needs to decide what portion of the day they don't want to use their iPhone, their computer, their television, or their air conditioner. Because if you can't replace the generation, then the only way to get to that goal is to reduce the demand, to reduce the supply of electricity.
The term I used when I first heard it, and the term that came to mind was, as you just said, this is very nonsensical. You know, this cannot here within the immediate future occur. But on the other hand, you can't just sit back and allow someone to expend those kinds of funds degrading your business.
That's exactly right.
And it's you know, it serves as an affront to every American energy worker, because not only does he single out coal, but he lumps natural gas, gas production, and gas consumption right with coal. It's all fossil fuels that he attacks.
It is, Chris, and I think either he doesn't understand the industry, or the engine of American industry and the economy, or he doesn't care. You know, it's one thing to say for a residential customer that you're going to do the best with what we have available. So if the solar panel's only available to you X hours of the day, that's when you're going to have electricity. But if you take that same attitude to heavy industry, where we mine, mill, manufacture, and forge what makes this country great, automobiles, steel, consumer goods, appliances, you can't do that to heavy industry. Heavy industry has to run. A steel mill has to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So for him to believe that he can ration electricity by limiting the alternative sources will devastate this country's industrial base, which along with coal is just now starting to show signs of recovery. We're hiring
Absolutely.
steel workers. We're refiring blast furnaces that have been idle for years. And just now when there's signs of hope that, again, our economy can regain its industrial strength, then along comes this guy trying to cut the feet out from underneath it.
It's just remarkable that that would happen. Every energy working across the heartland, every energy worker across the heartland ought to rise up in opposition to Mr. Bloomberg.
Absolutely, Chris. And I think that outrage needs to spread to the transportation infrastructure, the guys that run the trucks.
Yeah, if you don't mind it, you can't truck it, you can't train it,
That's exactly right.
you can't ship it by water.
Can't move it down the river. And those same modes of transportation that are moving the raw material to the plants are then moving the finished products, the steel, the cars, the wire, the automobiles.
And if you shut the natural gas development down, you know, again, you're putting the drillers, the well pad tenders, the pipeline, you know, all the people working up and down these pipelines that are being constructed today.
And taking a pretty good swipe if you attack natural gas on the chemical manufacturing industry, since natural gas is their feedstock, like coal was the feedstock to the steel industry. So you could compromise each one of those platforms by taking advantage of, or trying to take advantage of and reshape America's energy position.
He may have bit off a little more than he can chew here, Mr. Bloomberg. I mean, really, he may have woken a much bigger giant than what was present during the war on coal, since he's grouped and lumped the gas workers in with coal workers and coal mines with oil rigs. That's fossil fuels today has to be right around 60 or a greater percentage of all base fuel consumption.
It is. It's as high. I think generally nationally it's about 70%, but in specific areas it's as much, like here in West Virginia, it's as much as 98% of the fuel sources, because either the renewable resources aren't available. You know, I know the wind blows everywhere, but it has to blow in a certain velocity to get a windmill to generate electricity. Or the areas are so isolated that developing the infrastructure to move power from a renewable source to the population centers is just about impossible.
Fortunately, he was talking to a graduating class at MIT, where you have really, really sharp, for the most part, the people, high IQ, high aspiration, high understanding of how it all works together. And I suspect that the majority of the individuals in the class probably just shook their heads, or you know, they were being respectful to their commensurate speaker, but probably under their breath said, you know, there's no way, this doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, I do know just the cost, and I think the most of the rest of the country realizes this too. You know, renewable energy resources, while they're promising, they do show promise to generate a greater percentage of the electricity here in this country. But as we stand here today, they are not competitive. The fact that generation has grown so much is because those renewable sources are subsidized by the American taxpayer. And if you were to take that subsidy away, then their competitiveness would vanish completely. So if, to the extent that Mr. Bloomberg thinks he can reshape the country's electrical generation, if it was physically and scientifically possible, let's assume that it was, the cost to do that will come out of the taxpayer's pocket.
And incidentally, he put a fraction of that amount of money into a fund a couple years ago that brought negative attention to, I believe it was just confined to coal, coal mining and coal miners, and you know, very distasteful.
Yeah, the Beyond Coal campaign.
Yeah.
And you know, fronted by other environmental groups that at the same time that they espouse sympathy for what happened to West Virginia as the coal industry collapsed around us, we also need to understand that that's their goal. You know, if you want to help the people of West Virginia, then you let us mine coal and produce natural resources like we've done for
Is it
years.
fair to say to that point that their goal is not necessarily to expand renewables, but to do away with with coal and gas.
I think that's exactly right. And if they were truly worried about the energy future of this country, he could have taken that $500 million and invested it into energy research to make coal and other fossil fuels even cleaner. Even though I would sit here today and say we're as cleaner than we've ever been.
Or maybe he would have worked towards reducing the amount of CO2 that's being generated in the Pacific Rim.
Exactly. Go to
Asia, China,
yeah, where
Korea.
where there are no pollution controls.
Right.
Virtually no pollution controls.
You know, we had another trade mission that went to China to try to further the deal with China Energy just a couple weeks ago, and talking with several of those individuals. You know, once again, it's, you know, they all report having difficulty seeing across the street in downtown Beijing or Shanghai.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, it's not a criticism of where China and India are. It's just where they are in the evolution of their economy and their society. But they burn fossil fuels like this country did in the 1920s. That's kind of how backwards their technology is now. It's getting better every day. Part of getting better is using better coal resources, like India is, switching from their coal that they have within their own borders, which is lower quality, to higher quality Appalachian coal, burning the coal more efficient. But the other half of it is installing pollution control technology like we have here for sulfur dioxide and mercury and other things.
One other Bloomberg note, Governor Justice earlier this week, just hours after the Bloomberg report come out, mobilized coal and oil and gas and other energy groups here within the state, held a press conference, challenged Bloomberg, and vowed to fight him because he's looking out for West Virginia and West Virginians, of course, because it is a sort of a slap in the face to a state like West Virginia, and it seems to be a direct assault on you know, our way of life and all of our jobs here. The majority of our state's job and economic outputs energy related, one form or another.
I think Governor Justice's response was entirely appropriate. It would be no different than if some national group decided to outlaw the production of oranges. And you would expect the governor of Florida to react just the same way that Governor Justice did here in West Virginia.
Good. So hopefully we can keep that alive and you know, maintain some defense and opposition to it as it manifests here over the next few months.
Yeah, again, Chris, I think where we need to focus our attention as a country is figuring out how to make coal has to be here to keep the electricity load and energy balance in the right perspective. So we're going to have to use coal. Question is, how can we use it more efficiently?
And I think I personally think with every challenge like this comes opportunity.
Yes.
And I think, well, you know, the West Virginia and our energy industries are going to have the opportunity going forward to showcase how much cleaner fossil fuels are today. Coal specifically. You know, how much clean coal technologies are not just something of the future, they're here today. You know, these emissions have been ratcheted way down. They keep showing pictures of these modern power facilities and power plants that appear at first to be almost covered in smoke. But you and I know there's not any smoke there at all. It's water vapor.
That's right.
You know, you're seeing mist, water mist, and steam.
They're cloud factors.
Yeah, but they look, you know, like like they're belching smoke like the old days, and you know, that picture, the optics of that need to be explained a little bit.
Yes. Nothing more than water vapor.
You know, the other thing I would say, and just get your reaction, you know, the coal industry isn't necessarily against renewables. In fact, most people I talk to within the coal business, you know, they're supportive. They truly embrace all forms of energy. They realize that it's going to take every amp of power from every energy source to fuel our industrial and household energy needs.
Absolutely.
So you can't start eliminating things because you don't like them.
Well, and I always use the analogy of when the railroads in this country switched from coal to diesel fuel as a transportation fuel, they did that because the efficiency and the technology of the diesel locomotive had made it to the point where it was economical to deploy that. The government didn't say, no, you need to stop using coal.
Mm-hmm.
The technology advanced to the point where they were able to do that. And I think most of us view the generation of electricity the same way. As these resources and the technology matures and they can be deployed, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But the government doesn't need to mandate that. And in the past, when they have, not only here but in other countries, that's when things go terribly wrong. That's when the price of electricity skyrockets, or there's rolling blackouts, or you force what's called demand response,
mm-hmm.
where you tell the households or the industrial consumers you can only have electricity 4 hours today. When government interferes to try to mandate the source of the electricity or mandate that an electric company buy 20% of renewable energy, that's when things start to go terribly wrong.
You know, when you really think about it, we have what, 7,500 years of coal remaining. That's probably best case scenario. You know, we're not regenerating or making new coal to mine. So once we deplete what we have, and the United States has as much or more than anybody, you know, that's all there is.
Mm-hmm.
And just so the challenge of the future is going to be, and we got to rely on the development and perfection of our nuclear, or not our nuclear plus our renewable. But once coal's gone, it's going to be gone, and something's going to have to be there at that time to fill the void.
Yes. But until we've advanced the technology to that point, there's no reason to euthanize the other sources of electricity here in this country, be it nuclear, natural gas, or coal. We're going to need it all. So we might as well use it while we've got the opportunity. Again, or we can watch as more heavy industry. Again, industry is most susceptible to spikes in electricity prices. Or we can stand on the shores of this country and watch as more heavy industry departs for other countries around the world where they do use coal power and probably use it less efficiently than we do.
Great point, and I tell you, that's a great point to break here, Jason. We're about out of time. I want to thank you for coming back. We'll keep this subject alive and going forward, so thanks for dropping by. We'll get you back on here soon. And let me thank all you for watching this segment of the Coal Seam, brought to you by the Library Television Network. Thank you.